Anytime you get attached to a method, you know it works, but maybe by experimenting with the other method, you learn something new about your process that you didn't know. It's great to refresh yourself all the time, and that's always good.
I loved the book. I thought the book is amazing. I was very excited to read it. And if I could summarize it for people, tell me if you think this is right. But I felt like the embodiment of this book or your creative approach, you've read Zen and the Art of Archery, I'm sure, right?
I don't know if I've ever read that. I know I've had the book, but I don't know if I've ever read it.
It's a wonderful, fascinating book. And anyways, he talks about the sort of Zen approach to archery. Obviously, it's in the title. And he talks about not letting go of the arrow, like deliberately or intentionally. He says the string should fall from your hands like ripe fruit from the tree. And that's what I kept thinking of as I was thinking about your approach to the creative process. Is that in any way in the ballpark?
It sounds great. I hope so. I love the way it sounds.
Yeah, because the Buddhists talk about this idea of willful will, like when we're too intentional about what we're trying to do. Instead, it's like the difference between pursuing something and setting something up to ensue. I feel like your approach is how do you allow creativity to ensue rather than sort of consciously trying to be the thing.
Yes, it's about allowing it to happen, setting the stage, inviting it to happen, and also recognizing that we're not in control. So respectful and patiently await whatever's going to come.
Do you believe in the muses then, or something sort of otherworldly that visits us?
I think there's something otherworldly going on. I don't know if I would view it as visiting us. I think it's always there. It's more like a frequency that we can tune into. And sometimes we can tune into it, and sometimes we can't. Imagine the old days of AM radio, when you would try to tune in a radio station, it would faintly come in. And especially if you were driving, let's say you were driving across country and you didn't really know what stations were where, and you're just kind of hunting around on the dial, and then you kind of hear some noise, and then you can get it something to kind of come in. Sometimes it's conflicting with another station. And it's like that. There's a frequency out there of information that when we're lucky, we can tap into it. And it's something you can get better at the more you practice it.
I love that metaphor, because isn't one of the most wonderful feelings in the world to go back to when that was technologically how we got music or talk radio or whatever, when you fully connected to a station and it just came in super loud, like you just got it, and it went from fuzz to like surround sound music. I love that feeling.
It's great. And I can remember when I first got a digital a radio where you could put in the number of the station instead of it just being an analog dial. And the excitement of really being able to lock right in on the station easily was exciting too. It didn't make it less, sometimes when you have to work hard to get something, it's better. I didn't mind being able to get the music directly at that time.
And then when you think about that metaphor, you mentioned doing it in the car, it's like you lock into it, but then you're moving. And so it never lasts for very long. Like you're driving across the country, you tap into a station, but you only get maybe an hour or two with each station before you've gotten too far away from it. And now you've got to find the next one. Because there is something ephemeral, I feel like, about tapping into the creative process. It doesn't last.
No, absolutely true. And it comes and goes. It can come very quickly and it can go very quickly. And there's an energy that comes up when there's a band playing live in the room and we're playing a song over and over again, and it's okay, nothing special. And then when it does start becoming special, there's once you realize what's happening, it's a little scary because we don't know what changed to get this to happen, and we don't know how long it's going to last. And once you've noticed it, in some ways it's harder because now we're thinking about it. So I don't want this to stop. Where when you fall into it, it just sort of comes. Sometimes it comes out of boredom, out of, you play the same thing over and over again, and you kind of stop thinking about it. And then at some point it starts gelling in this way that you can't explain, because technically it's not much different than it was 2 minutes ago. No one in the room can say this is what's different. It just goes from pretty good to transcendent. And in those moments, once you realize it's transcendent, there is this fear of, I hope we can make it through the whole piece.
You talk in the book, I guess it's a John Lennon quote, but you said there's a sort of a rule of like when you start a song, try to finish it that day. Is that sort of like you landed on the station, like download as much as you can while you can?
Yeah, I heard that Lennon quote a long time ago, and I didn't fully understand the power of what he was talking about until recently, from working on things for a long period of time. In the early days, I would have thought of that as more of a work ethic point of, if you start something, finish it. But over time, I've come to realize that when you're in a particular groove of energy, when there's either you're getting an information download or whether you're playing something in a particular way, if you come back later to try to recreate that, it's not so easy. And it may actually be impossible. Earlier in my career, I would focus more on the content in the writing stages. And then in the performance stage or in the recording stage, it was only about documenting this thing that we already wrote. And I still like that method, but now I'm much more attentive to recording all of the moments leading up to that quote unquote performance time, because often the first time that it's played can never be recaptured. And it's actually better the first time. Before I was still trying to get it right. Now I'm not trying to get it right anymore. I'm trying to get the one. And sometimes the one, even I would say even in those days though, I would listen back. We'd work on a song, we'd work on the arrangement, we'd play it many times, and then maybe we'd have a revision. Let's change this part and this part. And then we would change the two parts, and then we would keep playing. And let's change now later in the day, let's change this part and this part. We change those parts. And it keeps getting refined as we work over the course of the day. And sometimes we would listen back to one of those earlier takes before it had those refinements and say, it's just better. It's just better, even though it doesn't have those details we liked that came later. You give up the detail for the whole in that case. Also, sometimes we'd see, okay, can we keep that original take, that magical take from earlier before it had the revisions, and can we incorporate the revisions into it through editing or another way? And sometimes we could, sometimes we couldn't. But I came to learn it was less about getting all the parts right than getting the overall energetic feeling right. That has more power than any of the individual elements.
I feel like I've gotten lucky with my books. Like I know some people whose sort of first book came out and it sold, right out of the gate, millions and millions of copies. I feel like I got lucky in that mine have sort of steadily sold and have sold more year over year. But that sort of transformative, immediate, life changing, you know, upper echelon, it's probably very hard to continue creating and to not become self-conscious about what you do once that's happened.
Absolutely. We see it happen to artists all the time. And, in is historically in the record business, there's the sophomore slump
Mm-hmm.
of you put out a first grade album, you've had your whole life to write your first album, and then you have this little window to write your second album.
Yeah.
And he went from nobody watching and nobody caring to all of a sudden the focus is on you, and no one's really prepared for it. So it's difficult for everyone. And then when you have great success, again, who do you talk to about it? Your parents don't know about that. All of your trusted advisors don't really know about that, and the ones that do on an industry level have different motivations than you as an artist. So it's very difficult to get any helpful information on how to deal with it.
Yeah, I imagine ego hits you on both extremes there. So the ego of like, I did it, I have the Midas touch, everything I do is gold and amazing. That's like sort of an artistic death sentence. But so is the, I can never measure up, I can't do it again, everyone's watching, it's impossible. You have to find some way to be present and both very committed and also, as you talk about in the book, kind of detached from all of that external stuff.
Absolutely. And I recommend artists to engage or re-engage with why they wanted to do it in the first place, and really find their love. When it goes from the thing you love to the thing you do for work, it's an issue. And to get back to that, I do this because I love this more than anything. I do this not because I got a good review, not because I sold a lot of copies. I
Yeah.
do this because this is what I do. It's what I've always wanted to do. And I'm going to continue doing it with the same head that I went into it in the first place, that allowed me to be successful in the first place. So it's helpful to remember what gets you there. And usually what gets you there is the first thing that gets snuffed out in
Sure.
success.
Yeah. Yes. Cheryl Strayed once talked about the difference between writing and publishing, and I think about that all the time. I
Tell me.
I love writing. That's what I got into this for. Publishing is the byproduct of writing, and
Yes,
if you're thinking about the final stage, you are probably neglecting the important stage, which is the what you would call the creative act. You're not being in the creative mode. You are thinking about the packaging and the positioning. Not that that stuff's not important, but you're thinking about publishing, which is necessary but not sufficient.
absolutely. And there's a time for it, but it's not when you're writing.
Mm-hmm.
I would say it's never the time to do it when you're writing. Not that sometimes it's okay. It's never the time to do it when you're writing. That when you're in the writing stage, there can be no other concerns other than what's the most interesting thing to me here now. That's
Yes.
all. And then when it's done and there are no more creative decisions to be made and the book is written and you have, it may not be the final version of the book, but where you know exactly what the book is, you've said what you want to say and you feel good about it. That would be the first time to think about, okay, what could a cover look like? What could the marketing look like? Who's the audience for this? If you start thinking who the audience is before you start writing, it's going to really muddy the water.
Our friend Neil Strauss, maybe he got this from you, but he told me this is before I'd even written my first book. I think he said the first draft is just for you. So he's like, don't think about what the publisher is going to allow you to say or not. What legally you're allowed to say. What's going to get you in trouble or not. What's going to do well or not. You got to do the first draft wholly from a place of passion and love and immediacy. And then afterwards, once you're looking at it, you can go, hey, maybe I don't want to say that about that person. It'll really hurt their feelings. Or, maybe, hey, this is too much this way or that way. You can get that in the polish, but you shouldn't be, anytime you're thinking about what other people are going to think while you're doing it, you're neglecting doing the thing.
That's great. I didn't know he said that, and I didn't. He didn't get that from me, but it's beautiful and accurate. It's just a like-minded approach. It also, as soon as you get into, while you're making something, getting into any kind of self-censorship,
Yeah.
You're really creating a dangerous. It's like you feel like you can't be yourself. You can't be you. And that's a very dangerous place to be for a creative person.
Yes. Well, Yogi Berra said you can't hit and think at the same time, and I think when you're self-censoring or you're worried about this or that, what you're doing is thinking and thus not hitting. So my favorite story in the book is the story about the man in Calcutta drawing water from the well, and somebody comes along and tells him, there's a more efficient way to do this, use this sort of pulley system, and he declines. I think about that because I started as a research assistant. So I learned like somebody else's methodology of writing. I learned Robert's. And so I do all my research on note cards. Like these are my note cards. So I do them all by hand. And it is so inefficient and so painstaking. And my handwriting gets worse every year because this is basically the only place that I write things by hand other than, our interview notes. But there's definitely tools that would be better than the way that I do it. But there's something special and sacred to me about the way that I do it. And I loved that story.
It's great. And I would say the book would recommend that you try one of the new methods as well.
Yes.
Just because, yes, but anytime you get attached to a method for a romantic reason, it works.
Yes.
And I'm not suggesting using another method because it's easier or saves you time, but maybe by experimenting with the other method, you learn something new about your process that you didn't know. And that's always good. It's great to refresh yourself all the time. It happens anyway. I mean, you're not the same person who wrote your first book.
Sure.
So if you're using exactly the same methods that guy was using, might not be optimal.
No, it's changed a ton, but I would clarify. Your book is full of paradoxes. I think much more Eastern than Western. Your book sort of embrace of paradox instead of sort of singular permanent truth. Because then you tell the story from about the man in Calcutta, and then you have this wonderful little poem on page 104, and you say, "Beware of the assumption that the way you work is the best way, simply because it's the way you've done it before."
Mm-hmm. And both of those are true.
Yes. That's negative capability. Keats said the mark of genius was the ability to have two contradictory thoughts in your head at the same time.
Beautiful.
And I feel like there is something inherently paradoxical about art, which is like sometimes you do it this way, sometimes you need to do it this way. Sometimes it's all about deliberate practice and putting your ass in the seat and doing it. And then other times the idea comes to you in the shower.
Yes. And I think you can extend that beyond creativity to everything in life. I don't know that there's a right way to do anything. I think there's the way we know, and there's maybe a better way, and maybe we'll find out someday.
Do you feel like your methodology or how you think about time in the studio has changed? I mean, you've been doing it 40 years, 50 years? How long?
Something like 40 years.
How much has your methodology changed?
I don't think it changed so much. The main difference is in the early days, I didn't understand as well what was and wasn't important. So I probably put more effort into things that meant less in the early days. I spent a lot of time in the recording studio over the course of my life. For the first 20 years, I was in the studio for, 12 hours a day, at least 6, if not 7 days a week. And in those days, usually in New York, in rooms with no windows and just like no life.
Yeah.
And now I aim to spend like from maybe 5 hours is about the amount of time that I can really focus with all of my attention. Whereas before, because we were in the studio, we felt like we were working, even when we weren't working. So it's like you get to the studio and you order lunch, and it's like it was more like clocking in time.
Yeah.
And now I don't clock in time, and we make it a point. We eat before we get there. We work like it's a military operation, and we get out as soon as we can. Not because we don't love it, but because there's life. There is life beyond. And if we get on a roll and something starts going good,
Yeah.
we could work all night. If that's what it takes, it's not the standard. The standard is we come in, we know what we're doing, we get it done. And then if something's magical, we're not going to let it we're not going to let that go.
Yes. Yeah, I worked on a couple books for these different rappers over the years, and it changed my understanding of rap music when they're talking about grinding in the studio and being there till 3 a.m, and then spending time with them and realizing that they got to the studio at 1 a.m. though, right? Like, or they got there at 4, but everyone played video games and shot the shit for 5 hours and then went in the booth. It's the difference between working and working is one we often gloss over, I think, in all domains.
And there's also I could make an argument for the opposite as well. Like I got to work with AC/DC at one point, and they were very professional at what they did, and they spent a great deal of time sitting on their chairs in their position where they were going to be playing, drinking coffee and smoking, and not playing.
Yeah.
And I can remember I was younger then, and more impatient, and feeling like, why are we not playing? And they knew exactly what they were doing.
Yeah.
Because they knew, okay, we're going to it's almost like doing a sprint. We're going to put all of ourselves into this thing, and we can do maybe 3 sprints, but we can't do 30 sprints. They won't be as good. We can do 3 sprints, and then we can sit and talk and drink coffee for 2 hours, and then maybe we could do 2 more sprints. And I remember being frustrated, feeling like, what are we doing here? We're here all day, and no music's happening. Yeah. And I would look into the control. I was in the control room. They were in the live room, and I would look through, and I would like point at my watch, and Malcolm Young, the guitar player, who's really the leader of the band, would like hold up his cigarette, and he's like point to his cigarettes, like let me just finish my cigarette, and then they still wouldn't play for another hour. It was always like, or let's have a cup of tea,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, speaking of paradox, there's an Eisenhower quote that I love where he says, "Plans are worthless, but planning is everything." And it may
That's
be
great.
that all of the different methodologies are, totally inconsequential or impossible to replicate. But what matters is that you have one that you do. Like they're totally. It's almost like a placebo. Like what matters is you have a thing that you stick with, that and you can change it, but what matters is that you have something. You can't just be winging it.
Agreed. I think having your way to do things, I know if I don't set a schedule for myself of what I'm going to do during the day, I end up not doing very much. And if I set a schedule, I'll do everything on the schedule. Sometimes begrudgingly, but I will get it. I will get through it.
Yes.
and and I think if we put one of the things I recommend in the book is like creating the equivalent of creating office hours, having a schedule to work where you say, I'm going to sit down for this. Could be 20 minutes, could be 3 hours, up to you what that window is, how you want to do it. But make a commitment, show up every day. And then there's no excuse, regardless of whether anything gets made during that window. You're not waiting for the right moment to start. You're starting, and you're doing it every day, and you're doing it at the same time every day, and you're building the habit of, I'm going to sit here every day, even if it's just to sit here and be bored. Something good will eventually come from that practice, whatever it is.
Do you know Stephen Pressfield?
I do.
His line, you got to put your ass where your heart wants to be. I love that.
That's great. That's great. He's great. His books are great.
Oh, they're the best. They're best. The best. You know what's amazing about a book like Gates of Fire is that it's only like, I don't know, 20 years old or 30 years old, but it feels like it's like 1,000 years old. Like when somebody does something, I guess even the War of Art, but when somebody does something and it's both very timely, but also without a place in time, that's something incredible about what art can do, where it can be everywhere and nowhere, current and timeless at the same time.
Yeah, I love music that is outside of time. And it can, and one of the things about using organic instruments is a piano sounds like a piano 100 years ago, and it sounds like a piano today. Sure. And it'll sound like a piano in 100 years. If you use the latest sounds, the newest sounds, the sounds of today, then tomorrow they'll sound like the sounds of yesterday.
Yes.
So it's a very delicate line to work with the newest of sounds, because it can end up sounding very dated. If you listen to music from the 80s, invariably it sounds like that's the music of the 80s because of it just has a dated sound. And that really is more because of technology than anything else.
Yeah. To me, one of my favorite like timeless songs is The Night That Drove Old Dixie Down. It's like, if you told me that song was actually written during the Civil War, I would have believed you.
Yeah, could have been. And it might even be based on something from then.
Yes. Well, I think it is, but it's like, how did you actually tap into what feels like the reincarnated spirit of a thing? I mean, they're not even American, they're Canadian. Like the guy that wrote that song is Canadian, and he's somehow capturing, the Southern feeling of defeat in the Civil War and managing to do it 100+ years after the fact. That's what's magical about art, when you manage to commune with spirits or a feeling that is no longer there.
It's also interesting that when we think of folk music, we think of from Bob Dylan on, like that window. That's like the folk revival. Yeah. But that's a revival. That was sure. A modern interpretation of old music. And so even the music from the 60s, it was new music attempting to be like the music from the 1920s or the 1890s.
Yes.
So the best music has this, it's rooted in something timeless. And when it's really exciting is when it sounds like it's timeless and it sounds like you've never heard anything like it before. That's radical. It doesn't sound like a copy of something from the past. It sounds like this has the roots and lineage of something from the past, but it's made into something radically new. And an example of that would be there's a pianist from Iceland, Vikingur Olafsson, he's on Deutsche Grammophon, young classical pianist. And if you listen to his music, he can play Bach pieces or Debussy pieces, and there's something about it where it's those same pieces. They're hundred or hundreds of years old. But when you hear his recordings of them, it's a modern record. Now he's still playing a piano. It's not like he's playing a modern instrument, but the way he approaches it, both from a rhythmic perspective in the way he plays and in a technical perspective from the way it's recorded, it's modern and it's great. It's really refreshing.
Yeah, I felt that with one of my favorite songs that I think you've worked on, which is the Johnny Cash "Streets of Laredo" song. That's what, like 100+ year old song, and it feels like it's both very old, and then it feels somehow newer and more timeless than all the old versions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of the power of the Johnny Cash stuff is his ability to inhabit a song and tell a story in a way where when he says the words, you just believe him.
Yes.
It's real. So in the past, maybe it was a singer singing the Streets of Laredo, but
Yeah.
when Johnny Cash sings it, it's not a singer singing it. It's he's telling you his story, the Streets of Laredo in that case.
Yeah. And I feel like, to go to your point about sort of old, the timeless instruments versus the sort of more technological ones, the Trent Reznor version of "Hurt" is obviously an amazing song. It's deeply personal. It's dark and beautiful and all these things. It would be one of the greatest songs ever on its own. But then there's something about the Cash version that strips it down and removes whatever, places it in some kind of scene or moment in time by maybe going to the more timeless instruments.
I think it's a combination of that. Is that the Trent version was a modern record and
Yeah.
the Johnny version was essentially a traditional record. But more than that is the nature of the lyrics and the sentiment of what's being said. You know, looking back over your life with regret when you're 20 years old has one valence. And when you're 70 years old, talking about looking back over your life and all you see is regret, it has a
Yeah.
different, it's much worse.
Yeah.
So from a lyrical, even, and the song was selected for that reason, that the lyrics had such great power. But the idea of a grown-up singing those lyrics versus a young person singing those lyrics changes how much power those words have.
I'm glad you brought that up, because it actually illustrates something really beautiful and powerful in the book. You're talking about how the personal is the universal. How could it be? It makes no sense that a deeply personal song written by a 20-year-old would be truer and more personal for a person that he had never met, who'd lived a radically different life. But somehow it feels truer and more of a Johnny Cash song than it does of the person that wrote it, which to me is the personal is the universal.
Absolutely. And I think Trent would tell you it's Johnny Cash's song now.
Yeah.
I know that when Trent performs it now, he performs the Johnny Cash version.
Really? He does like the acoustic version.
He does.
Oh, that's so beautiful. Oh, I love that. I think about that. Obviously, the book that's influenced my life the most is Mark Aurelius' Meditations. And what I think is so surreal about that book is you have the most powerful person in the world 2,000 years ago writing a journal to themselves, never intending it to be published. In multiple cases, he's speaking only of his personal experience. He's trying to give no philosophical lessons to anyone other than himself. In multiple times in the book, he's like, posthumous fame is worthless. It doesn't matter if you're remembered after you die. Nothing lasts. And then somehow he writes, universal, accessible, practical guide to living that resonates with ordinary average people 2,000 years later.
Yeah, it's amazing how that works. I just had the book that probably inspired me the most is the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu,
Sure.
and also 3,000 years old, I believe. And it was the no one really knows, but what we believe the story is, or at least one of the stories of why the book exists, is the old man, Lao Tzu, was leaving town, and a person, I believe it was a guard at the on the outskirts of town, said, well, if you're going to leave, can you like tell me what to do? Like you were like, he was the wise man, and he wrote these 81 things just for this one person.
Mm-hmm.
And that has, again, I don't know if that's a true story, we don't know, 3,000 years ago, but it was just a offhanded, this is what I know for one person. And it, after the Bible, it's the most published book in the world.
It's like if you had asked him to put down the one thing he was going to leave to posterity to summarize all of his beliefs, first off, the task probably would have been paralyzing. It would have been, or it would have taken years and years. But yeah, if that story is true, offhandedly doing it for a stranger, you know, in a few minutes or whatever before you are on your way, there's probably something that almost sounds like one of the exercises that you have towards the end of the book. Like, hey, put everything you know down in one quick thing, but you only have 81 spots or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You hit the harder you're trying to hit the target, the less likely you are to hit the target.
Yes, that goes back to what we were saying at the beginning about allowing it to happen, letting the string on the bow and arrow fall from your hand. It's the allowing.
Mm-hmm. And it's not getting in your own way.
Yeah. And not trying too hard. Trying is the problem. Now there's a time, you know, in the process where the way I like to do it is generate a lot of material without caring. Mm-hmm. When I say without caring, we care always. We want to make the best thing we can, but sure, without any pressure at all, zero stakes. We're going to have fun. We're going to make things we like. And we do that until we have enough stuff where we look at it. It's like, wow, there's a bunch of cool stuff here. Now, how can we put this in a form where we can share it?
Yeah. And
it's still not a commercial concern. When I say share it, I mean in a way that I can play it for you, let's say.
Yeah.
That's all. It's not, there are no big stakes. It's like, I want to make something that I can show to my friend, see what he thinks. That's all.
It's like the editing and the polish and the refining and the making of the choices about what goes on, what doesn't, what needs more work and what doesn't. That's where you're probably more disciplined, hardworking, intentional, because that you're no longer in the purely creative act phase.
Yes. Yeah. Once you've gathered the material and you know what it is, it's like if you think you know what it is before you start, that limits what it can be.
Yeah.
You can have maybe a starting point of thinking, I think it's something like this. But then as you're making the something like this, it turns into something like that instead. And you recognize that is better than the this. You follow that. You follow where the energy is. And once you get to the part where you've done following the energy, now you have this stuff, but it's not in the form to share yet. That's when you can start thinking that we call that the crafting phase in the book. So the first stage is the seed phase where we're gathering ideas. The second phase is the experimentation phase where we're watering those seeds, seeing what they want to be on their own. We're bringing very little of ourselves to it. We're supporting their growth. And then in the third phase starts the craft phase where we start getting more involved ourselves. Like we have this now we have this tree growing, and maybe we realize if we trim these branches, more light's going to come through and shine on the rest of the garden. That would be a good thing. But up till then, we're just trying to get the tree to grow in the earlier stages. So now we're taking more of a hands-on approach, and then we still might go back and forth between that creative phase or crafting phase and our experimentation phase. They all run into each other. But one of the things that I learned from the book in working on the book is that last phase, the editing and the getting ready to share it, you can do that on a schedule. Whereas you can't really collect the seeds on a schedule. You can't really do the experimentation on a schedule. You can start to have a schedule for yourself when you get to the crafting phase, but often you end up back in the earlier phases. So
Sure.
it's very loose. But it's not until you've really cracked the code of the thing that you're working on, and it's very clear to you, this is what it is, this is what it wants to be, and I want to be associated with this thing that it wants to be. I'm happy to, bring this out into the world. That's when you can start thinking about, okay, let's have a timetable. We can finish it now, because there's most of the magic part of it has already happened.
Yes. I've found when I'm working on a book, there's an uphill part and a downhill part. And it's I don't know exactly when it happens, but it's very obvious to me which phase I'm in. So the uphill one is generative. It's tapping in, as you're talking about. It's figuring out where it's going and all of that. And then there comes some moment where you now actually do kind of have a sense of what it is, and you're more in the phase of finishing it, refining it, making choices about it. But there's the early days and the later days, and the early days are the harder ones because so much is unknown, and so much of it depends on, as we were talking about, something other than us.
Absolutely. But once we have the material and it's on us to kind of put it together, it's a different puzzle. It's the jigsaw puzzle that the pieces are all there. You just need to put them together, but it's clear what that puzzle's going to be when you're done. There's a picture on the box of what it's going to be. Do you know what I'm saying? Once you can envision the picture on the box and you have all the pieces to make it, then it's just time and focused time and attention.
Totally. Let me ask you a question. So you've been doing this a long time. You've worked with so many amazing artists. Obviously, you know what you're doing. How have you managed to stay humble and flexible? And I imagine there's this sort of stereotypical record producer, just like there's the stereotypical head football coach that comes in. I'm the boss. I know what we need to do. Listen to me. That's obviously not your style, but there's a human temptation there, I'm sure.
Well, since every project I work on is so different, and since on a daily basis I see something work that I don't understand, I could never have that feeling of it being about me. I know it's not about me because I do it all the time, and I see I'm happy to be there. I'm happy to witness it and experience it. I'm happy when a possible solution occurs that works, but I don't feel like that has anything to do with me. And I'm just as happy if if a better solution occurs to someone else in the room, as long as the project gets better. I don't care. I just want, there's no ego in it, because we're all on a team working together for this thing, whatever it is, to be the best it could be. So there's no room for anyone to have any part of it be theirs. It's none of ours, really.
There's a Lao Tzu quote that I like, that I wondered if it sort of approaches your philosophy, which is, um, uh, those who do not know speak, those who know do not speak. Um, did I say that right? Those who do not know speak, and those who know do not speak. Right. That the sort of the wisest person in the room is sort of sitting back and letting things happen, as opposed to trying to force them to happen.
Well, if we know that we don't know, we have great power. We're not trying to solve the problem. We're watching the knot untie. We're seeing it happen.
Sure. And is that sort of your approach? Like you're sort of sitting back, seeing it happen, and if AC/DC wants to smoke cigarettes and drink tea for 5 hours before the work comes, you're like, I'll take that ride.
Well, I'm better at taking that ride now than I was then 25 years ago because I didn't understand it as well then. Now I'm ready to take the ride with any of the artists I work with as far as they want to take it. And if anyone involved in the project thinks it can be better than it is, I want to see that, just because I think it's good. If someone else involved thinks it can be better, I'm up for that. I'm not in any hurry to finish anything. I want it to be the best it could be.
Right. Right. And so if you're going into each project as a student, you will learn and grow and change. If you go into every project as the master, maybe they will learn, but you won't learn. There's that Zen story about the master and the student, and the student says, tell me what I need to know, and he starts to pour water in the student's cup, but the cup is already full, and so no more water can go in.
Beautiful.
So you feel like every time you walk in the studio, you're still learning?
Absolutely. Every time. And I'm continually astonished on a regular basis by what happens.
What do you find that is the most? Like what do you find astonishes you? How is it how different people work, or is it what is it?
More what works, because if someone says, I have an idea, I want to do this, and you hear the idea and it sounds bad. like when I imagine what's being said sounds bad, and like, okay, let's hear it. And then they demonstrate it and it's great. And that's an example of where the language of explaining things doesn't do it justice. One of the things I talk about in the book is always, make a model. Always don't talk about it. Show what it is that you're doing. Yes. Don't say the kind of article you want to write. Write the article, show me the article, then we talk about the article. And what's great about that also is it takes it out of the personal. If you have an idea, it's your idea. And then we could argue about your idea, and that's personal. Whereas once it's on paper, it's outside of you, and it's this thing that we're collaborating on together to make it be the best it could be. We're not talking about your idea now. We're talking about, is this sentence the best sentence it could be? Mm-hmm. That's not a slight against you. We're working together to make this sentence the best it could be.
It's like in improv, you're supposed to say yes and, or I forget what the exact phrase is, but you're never supposed to shut down the direction of a scene or a person's character. You're always supposed to encourage it, and then you can redirect it however you want to. But if you stop, you're ruining it in some way.
Yes, and the time to redirect it would be after the person who's experimenting with it realizes themselves that it's not what they want it to be. Like at that point, then it might come up like, well, what else can we do?
Yeah.
Does anybody have an idea? But we want to try every idea. We want to see where it leads, because you never know. You really never know what's going to work and what's not going to work.
Yeah, you don't. You don't. And when you think you know, you're right in the sense that if you say something's not going to work, you're not going to try it. So it's definitely not going to work.
Yeah, and the chances, if you energetically decide it's not going to work, even if you do try it, the chances of it working are less, just
Sure.
because of we can trick ourselves into sabotaging ourselves.
Did I lose you?
Nope, I'm here. Can you
Oh,
hear me?
you're back. Yeah, yeah. Sorry, sorry.
Yeah,
Uh,
I just finished talking. I stopped when
oh,
I finished.
I think I lost you for a second, and then I didn't hear you stop.
Okay.
Um, yeah, that's fascinating to me. And also I think you talk about seeing creativity as a devotional act. I thought that was a beautiful expression. If you do see something sacred about it, and that everyone's way of doing it is sacred to them, I think you're a lot more respectful of the process and other people's process, um, than if you think there's sort of one way to do it.
Yeah, I don't think that there's a right way to do anything. And I would never dictate to anyone else how to do anything. If someone asks, I would say maybe this is how I would try it, but I would never assume that that's what's going to be best for them, because you can't know. You can't know. We all have our own set of experiences that form who we are, and my solution to a problem has to do with my life experiences, and your solution to a problem has to do with your life experiences, and one's not more right than the other. It's the one that's right for me is the one that's mine, and the one that's right for you is yours. And there's you can't compare or say one's better than the other. It's like if is you know is Bob Dylan better at being the Ramones than the Ramones? No. The Ramones are better at being the Ramones than the Ramones, and Bob Dylan is better at being Bob Dylan than the Ramones. Everything is like that. Everything. It's like we can't inhabit any, because otherwise it's all the same. I heard an interesting thing recently that there's a lot of talk about AI art now,
Yeah.
and that when if all of the inputs into the AI are the same, which they will be from all the competing AIs, they'll all have the same database, that eventually, as they get better and better, and you put in the parameters of what you're looking for, they'll all spit out the same answer. Now, and that's technically the right answer. Now, if you were going to engage with a subject and another writer was going to engage with a subject, and you were both right about it, the chances of those articles being similar, or books being similar, they won't. I mean, the subject will be the same, but the perspective is completely different.
Yes. I actually had I had Chat GBT. I was fucking around with it, and actually Billy helped me with this. Who you know? I was like, Billy, can you have Chat GBT write a daily Stoic email on the theme of replaceability? Um, which I thought was a fun little artistic statement in and of itself. And it did an okay job. Yeah, I wouldn't say it's perfect, and I would say you could definitely feel a difference between it writing it and me writing it, and there's some inaccuracies and blah blah blah. But to me, the creative act there, even though it is not the text on the page, the creative act was, um, I'm going to have a computer replace me and write an email about replaceability. And so I think the reason AI is both interesting but also fundamentally not a threat in the way that people are thinking about it is that humans always have the ability to use the tools how we see fit, and that is inherently what creativity and art is about.
Agreed. Yeah, it's about taste, and the computer doesn't have taste.
Yeah. Right. The artist didn't make the toilet, but the decision to say that the toilet is a piece of art, that is the art.
Exactly. It's always it's funny because, pointing the finger, don't look at the moon, don't look at the finger pointing at the moon. But when it comes to art, there is something about that finger. In some ways, the finger is what tells you the moon's the moon in art when it comes to art.
Sure. The art is inseparable from the artist and the artist's intention and what was included and not included.
Yes. And that said, your reading of the art and the artist's intention don't have to match at all.
Totally. Right. What they said and what you hear can be totally different things.
Totally different. And I have a feeling are most of the time.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of System of a Down, I was reading about I forget what song it is on the album, but isn't there like a bridge, a famous bridge in one of the songs that was just randomly selected from a book?
Yes. And it's one of the peak moments in the song. So
right.
it
right.
just happens. Yeah.
So the artist's intention there is both relevant and totally irrelevant at the same time. What it means is totally up to both the singer and the listener.
Yes. And there's the Beatles song, the benefit of Mr. Kite, for the benefit of Mr. Kite. Do you know that song?
No.
John, it's on, I think it's might be on the White Album. John Lennon sings it. And the lyrics are just a poster. It was like an old circus poster in his room, and he looked up at the poster and he just sang the words written on the poster. And it's a great Beatles song. And it's just what happened to be the lyrics that were in front of him in the room. I made a whole album with Tom Petty where do you remember when refrigerator magnet poetry kits were popular in bookstores?
Sure.
Where you could buy a little kit and it would have 50 words or 100 words. And
we have one on my fridge right now.
Great. So we bought all of the different choices of the magnetic poetry kits and took out all of the connecting words, all of the thes and the us and the stuff that makes the sentence, and just kind of kept the more substantial words. And we had them all on a music stand because the music stand's metal. And so it looked like a blackboard with just words all over it, not in any order, just split all over. We did have them all right side up, but not like put together in sentences, just like looking at a series of words. And Tom already had the songs written, but he didn't have the lyrics. So we would record, the band would play, and he would look at these, just the words in front of him, and make up a song as we went in real time, pulling words from the magnets. And it was incredible. And there's some beautiful songs, and they wouldn't have happened any other way. They wouldn't have happened any other way than that.
I love that, and I also hate it at the same time. There's something about it, like I love Bon Iver, and you never know what he's singing about, and then sometimes you look up what he's singing and you go, this doesn't make any sense at all. It changes it for me because I there's some part of me that wants it to be some profound thing that I'm hearing in it, and then you find out that he was singing about something totally different.
Sometimes it's just the sound of the words.
Yes.
Sometimes it's not the story. Sometimes it's the sound. The right sound at the right time really makes a big difference. We'll often work on songs where an artist will make up scat words, not just nonsense talking through the song. And on occasion, there'll be a phrase that just sounds good in that spot, maybe
Yeah.
several of them. And we'll do this over and over again and get collect phrases that fit in certain moments in the song. And then the artist takes those and looks at it like a crossword puzzle. It's like, okay, I have this line, I have this line, I have this line. What could the story be? What would make sense with this? Because this sounds really good here. So it doesn't have to be. Sometimes it's not about the story. It's just about the way the words make you feel. I remember asking Neil Young about if he knows what his songs mean. He said he has no idea.
That's a very Zen thing too. Like this sort of Zen paradoxes or parables or sentences or mantras, and you're just like, I think that the enlightenment is figuring out that it's both gibberish and not gibberish at the same time.
Yeah, there is something interesting about certain phrases when you hear songs. Certain phrases in songs, you can hear them over and over again, repeated over and over again, and every time you hear them, you think of something different. Like it's almost like the same phrase unfolds over the course of a song. And then
Yes.
there are other phrases where if you try that, the third time you hear it, it's like, I already heard that. I don't want to hear that anymore. And
Yeah.
I can't tell you what makes one work and what makes another not work. It really happens through trial and error. But when you hear something that sounds good repeated, it's miraculous. It's like, why does this stay interesting over and over and over again? Maybe get more interesting as the song goes.
I can only write to songs that not only do that, but where I can, like, when you hit repeat on a song, and then if you hit repeat one more time, it just plays that song on a loop. I can only write to songs on a loop, and I'll get, maybe a few hundred listens out of each song, and then I have to move on to a different song. But there's something to me about getting lost in the not knowing what place you are in a song, but it just going over and over and over and over again, that allows me to access whatever creativity comes in my writing. It has to be those kinds of songs.
Cool. For me, either writing or reading, I can't listen to anything with lyrics. If there are lyrics in the music, I can't focus on what I'm reading. I can't digest the information. My ear goes to the music, to the words, and I get confused. So I only listen to instrumental music.
You're probably at a different wavelength than I am, and that's what allows you to be a music guy.
So who knows? It's not for me to say. I don't know. I just know that I can listen to lyrics in a different language that I don't understand, and then I can still function in an English world.
Right. We were talking about songs that sound like they're totally timeless. Speaking of Tom Petty, how the fuck was Free Falling written in 1989?
What do you mean?
That song feels like at least 50 years older than that.
There are certain songs
so perfectly timeless.
But there's some songs like that, like "Blowing in the Wind." I can't believe Bob Dylan wrote "Blowing in the Wind." It feels like they were singing that song 100 years ago. Had to be.
Right.
That's forever. There is no world before "Blowing in the Wind."
Yeah, like Free Falling, if you were like, oh, this is America's national anthem, I'd be like, that makes sense. Obviously, we updated it a little bit, but like, that's how old that song feels.
It's funny. I recently interviewed Iggy Pop for the Broken Record podcast, and the Stooges, Iggy's band, was going on at the same time as the Beatles. Yet we think of the Beatles as forever ago.
Right.
And the Stooges feels kind of more modern, more current. And they were going on at the same time.
Right.
And he attributes it to the fact that they just didn't get popular. It's like the Beatles were popular from the first day, so you start tracking them from when they were popular. And the Stooges, everyone kind of came to the Stooges whenever it came to them. Many people more recently, and still people are coming to it in a different way than it's just this ubiquitous thing. I don't know if that's true, but it was an interesting idea. I want to tell you about my new podcast.
Yeah.
It's called Tetragrammaton, and it's where I've been doing Broken Record for 5 years, and I interview musicians. And at some point, I came to realize I'm so interested in things beyond musicians. Why am I just talking to musicians?
Sure.
So in the Tetragrammaton podcast, I'll talk to writers, directors, actors, chefs, coaches, craftspeople, astronauts, anyone who's interesting. So I'm really excited about that. I feel like it's going to be fun and open up the excitement of doing deep dives into all the things I'm interested in.
That's amazing. I can't wait to listen. And yeah, I think what I have found is like elite performance is elite performance is elite performance. So if I am talking with a bunch of Navy SEALs, their vibe is the same as an NFL team, which is the same as like a great rock and roll band, which is the same as, insert some other form of elite performance. They're all
CEO.
tapping into some higher plane.
Absolutely. And it's interesting hearing it from the different perspectives. And the other thing that I find really interesting from talking to people in a podcast form is I get to learn a tremendous amount about myself. Like when we really listen to other people talk about themselves, we get to learn about ourselves too. And it's beautiful and interesting, and it wouldn't happen in any other way.
Yeah. Well, you talked about this, that like, if you're an artist and you're looking for inspiration, don't turn on the radio, like go to a museum filled with, the greatest works of antiquity. And I think that's one of the things you find in great performers is that they don't try to steal little advantages from their peers in that profession. They go to elite performance in totally different domains, and that's where they find the little things that they tend to incorporate into what they do.
What's also great about that is it's new again. If you're inspired by an idea from 200 years ago, that's not on everyone's top of mind today.
Yeah.
So it has a freshness that's different. Whereas if you make a song that sounds like the song that just played on the radio, yes, that's the current sound, but it's also, well, that was just on the radio. Why bother making one that sounds like that? That's one's already out. I remember at one point an A&R person telling me they were all excited about, they found, someone who's like, was like the new Prince. It's like, we don't need the new Prince. We have Prince. We need someone who's, the new Prince isn't going to be anything like Prince.
Right. The new Prince could be a rapper or a classical musician or something totally the genre doesn't even have a name.
Absolutely. Yeah. Usually it doesn't have a name is a good point, because Prince really reinvented. I mean, he was doing in some ways an extension of traditional R&B music, but Prince music is different than all the music that came before it. It's very particular to him. And that's part of what makes it great, is when it goes through when it goes through your filter and you find a way to do it where no one else does it in that way. The other version, that's the version that excites me the most, when you find a way to do it that no one else does it. The other version, maybe less exciting, but also great, is when you can do the same thing that other people could do, but you can do it so much better than anyone's ever done it before. it's just crazy. So, and that happens sometimes with singers. Like certain singers just, you can't believe you're in the same room while they're singing. You can't believe anyone on earth can sing like that. And that's thrilling no matter what.
Yeah. You know what I love about that idea of going back to the ancients or whatever is that that's also what the ancients were doing. I was in Meditations. Marcus Aurelius quotes a bunch of the Greek playwrights, Euripides, Aeschylus, etc. And I don't know, one day it just hit me. I was like, how long between that period, that period of Rome, and then the Greek playwrights, and I realized that like Euripides, who Marcus is quoting from memory, and he is even quoting plays that no longer exist, like they were lost. All we have is the fragments that appear in these little letters and stuff. The Greek playwrights were as distant to the Romans as Shakespeare is to us.
Mm, incredible. Incredible. And was it still, were things still done in an oral tradition at that point?
No, I mean, they would have been written. He might have read the plays. He also would have, seen them perform. But, what is Shakespeare doing? Shakespeare is stealing from the writings of Plutarch, who, existed roughly around the time of Marcus Aurelius. He quotes other fables and stuff, but like you can tell that Shakespeare is stealing from ancient stories, just as like the Renaissance was powered by them falling back in love with the Greeks and the Romans.
Incredible. Incredible.
And so that's all, we're all doing that.
Yeah. And it goes back to the folk revival story. It's like it all just, they're echoes of the past that are reinterpreted in a new way. And often the reason they're reinterpreted in a new way is only because the people are different, not because they're trying to do it different. There's a story in the book about how, the Beatles were imitating American rock and roll, and it sounded like the Beatles. It definitely sounded like it was rooted in American rock and roll, but it was just different because they were different. And you can't help but bring your own filter into it. I talked to George Clinton yesterday, 2 days ago, for the podcast, and I asked him where the Mothership came from, because I remember as a kid, the Mothership Connection was one of my favorite, maybe my favorite Parliament Funkadelic albums. Might have just been Parliament on that one. And the idea of having this spaceship land, and then I have only seen images, I didn't get to see them live, but of this giant spaceship on stage. And I asked him what the inspiration was, and he said Pink Floyd. And I never would have imagined that in a million years. But he's like, Pink Floyd had these big stage shows, and it was really cool. And I thought, oh, maybe we can do something like that. How about we do a spaceship? But we never know where the direction the ideas are coming from. It's always surprising. And that's one of the great things about the podcast is we get to talk to these people who make things that we love, and hearing where some of these things came from, or the line of thinking that allowed these things to come into existence, is so interesting to learn about if you're a fan like I am.
Yeah, the Stoics love this idea that we never step in the same river twice. And I think that's obvious to people, like the river is changing. But like what we also forget is that the second meaning of that quote is that we aren't the same.
Yes, we're always changing. I think there's a line in the book, the person who comes back to the work the next day is, I'm not saying exactly right, but the person who comes back to the work the next day isn't the same person who was working on it the day before.
Right. Yeah, what do you think about artists re-recording their masters? I thought that some of the Taylor Swift stuff is interesting because she's now in her 30s re-recording songs that she did from a place that you can't recreate. In some ways, I feel like the songs are better.
I really don't like the idea. I don't like the idea of redoing something that you've done for the reason that it's being done, which is a commercial reason.
Sure.
If the reason you want to go back to an old work and reinterpret it because you want to shed new light on it, that's exciting.
Hmm.
But to put your creative energy into, I just know I've been burned so many times. I like oldies music, a lot of, like,
Yeah.
I grew up with a station in New York called WCBS that played like 50s, 60s into the 70s. But it's called oldies. There's most cities have an oldie station,
Yeah.
and I love the music on the oldie station. And on occasion, I'd hear an oldie that I'd love, and then I would, in those days, iTunes buy the song on
Yeah.
iTunes, and the version that would come wasn't the original version. It was a
Remastered.
later, not remastered, replayed.
Oh.
It was a new version of the old song, trying to copy the old version so that whoever owned the old version, it was purely a business thing.
Sure.
And it you could it was so heartbreaking to hear the new version because they were close, but there's so many little magical elements in what makes something that you like what it is.
Sure.
And to upset that balance in any way or try to recreate it, it almost seems sacrilegious to me. Like it's yeah, I will say I'm really against the idea. Now, at one point, Led Zeppelin went back. They made an album called No Quarter where they came together. I think it was called No Quarter. I'm not sure. They came back together at some point, maybe in the 80s, maybe in the early 90s, and they did like Middle Eastern versions or African versions of their songs. And that was
Yeah.
fascinating because that was
Sure.
something they wanted to do. They wanted to like reinterpret their material in a new way. And it's thrilling to hear something you like through a new lens.
Yeah.
So I'm very much into reinterpretation. I'm not into copying for the sake of commerce.
All right. So, a somewhat personal artistic question I have for you. Maybe you can give me some reassurance or guidance. Okay. So, I agree that who we are when we make something will never be that thing again. And I had to go back through and read some of my earlier books. I had to reread The Obstacle is the Way. And what I was struck by, what I noticed there really for the first time, was that there was a tightness to the writing, and the book is shorter. Almost each one of my books has gotten slightly longer than the last one. And I can't tell, or I don't know how I would tell, if not that that's positive or negative, but is that coming from a place of nuance and complexity and better material? Or am I growing more self indulgent? And that keeps me up at night.
Yeah, don't let it keep you up at night. First of all, there's no way to answer that question. Only you could answer that question.
Yeah,
And if the self-indulgent version of yourself is better than the more concise version of yourself, it doesn't matter. So all
true.
that matters is which is better. Your reason for doing it or how they came to pass doesn't matter at all. All that matters is which do you prefer to read? If you prefer to read in the old you, maybe the next book you do in a more tight way. If you prefer to read in the more self-indulgent way, that's not a bad thing. In art, self-indulgence is not a bad thing.
That's interesting. I didn't think about it that way. Yeah, for me, I was thinking, I think I'm prouder of the later books because I know what went into them and I feel like I did a better job. I wouldn't classify it as self indulgent. I more thought about it as I see the world as being more complicated, and I'm unable to how I could write when I was 26. I I wouldn't let myself get away with at 36.
I think that's all good news. That sounds like growth. And
Yeah.
there's nothing to question. And I said self-indulgent because you said self-indulgent,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I thought
Yeah.
it was funny. And I thought it was funny. to talk about it as a good quality, which it can be as an artist.
Sure.
Like there's definitely a place for that. There's something about self-indulgence demonstrates confidence, and having confidence in your work is a good thing. If you kept it concise out of concern that someone wasn't going to like it, so you have to make it really tight and perfect, now you're confident enough to let it flow. Now, again, there's no right or wrong here. It really is down to you how you feel, which version is truer to who you are today. And if you feel like if you read something from the past and it inspires you, like, wow, I really like it tight like that, I want to do one of those, you could do that.
Sure.
But not, there's not a right or wrong. It's more of a what strikes your fancy, what speaks to you.
Yeah. Although I'm sure you've seen it that as someone becomes successful and has more and more control, that isn't necessarily a good freedom, right? You can become pompous or out of touch or long-winded, or any number of seemingly
do you
negative
feel
traits.
do you feel pompous, long-winded, or out of touch?
No, but I'm not sure anyone that is those things feels those things.
I don't know. I think the people who are those things are probably not worried about being those things.
That's what I mean, and that's why they're those things.
No, but you're worried about it. So what I'm saying is, if it's like, doctor, I need to be committed to the mental asylum. I'm crazy. It's like, well, if you think you're crazy, you're not crazy.
I
if you
remember
can.
Go ahead.
No. Go.
I remember once I was at this event and this guy was supposed to get up and talk for 15 minutes, and he talked for like an hour and a half. And I just think no one wanted to be rude to that guy, but somebody needed to cut him off. And I think about not being that guy.
Well, I think the other way. I think we don't need to be rude to him. And if you were in the audience and you were uncomfortable after 15 minutes, you and everyone else could have got up and walked out. And that would have been fine. And if everyone would have left and if he would have stayed there and just kept talking, that would have been fine too. Like, that's okay. It's all okay.
Sure.
There isn't a right and wrong it's not anyone's job to say you only have 15 minutes. It's like, I only have 15 minutes, so I'm leaving when it comes to 15 minutes. But if I'm interested, I'll stay for 5 days. I'll stay forever.
That's true. Right. Really, the criticism is that it was boring, not how long it was.
Exactly. I had a similar experience recently where I did feel like I was trapped but it was a personal presentation given to me and one other friend, and it just never ended, and it was not good, and it was a bad feeling in the room.
Well, maybe we should take that as a sign to wrap this up. This has been a total honor for me. I've written probably as much of my writing to your music as any of the artists you've worked with, as any other probably living or dead person. So thank you very much for this. And I love the book. I think the book is incredible. And actually, do you have one more minute? Because there's one more thing I wanted to bring up.
Yeah, and I have one here.
Obviously, you're not really in this book, really at all. The word "I" appears like maybe once, and there's no real gossip. And I was thinking about, that's probably the book that publishers wanted, I'm sure. That's probably the book that readers expect. But this is ultimately a much more valuable book in that it's universal and more prescriptive than a bunch of celebrity stories. But what do you think it is, the part of us, like, I bet that book would sell better than this book in the short term, at least, right?
Maybe so.
This is all stories of Adele and the Red Hot Chili Peppers and stuff.
Yeah.
So what part of us wants that versus this, even though this is much more useful and valuable?
I can't speak to that, but I know that other book was not interesting to me to write, and this book was. And I feel like this book we talked earlier about the, timeless music and natural instruments. And I felt like if the book was about me or my experiences, it would be limited to this 40-year period, this now. And I think the things I'm talking about are things I've noticed, but they're not related to time. They're it's like pointing outside and saying, look, it's raining. I'm noticing the rain. I'm pointing out the rain. I didn't write the rain. I didn't create the rain. I'm just saying, wow, look how beautiful that looks. Look how it cools things down. Look at the direction it goes when the wind is blowing. Look at how when it's raining far away, you can see it in the distance, how interesting that looks. I'm engaging with these ideas that I can't say are my ideas. They just are. That's just what is. And that's interesting to me. And when I set out to write the book, and I met you right when I was setting out to write the book, and I remember, I don't know if you remember, but you were not, it didn't sound like you were sold on what the book was going to be when I described it to you, in the same way that when I described it to publishers, they were willing to buy it, but they were willing to buy it with the idea that they could get me to change it to what they wanted it to be. And every conversation I had with a publisher 7 or 8 years ago was, yes, but of course you're going to tell a story about Jay-Z in the studio. It's like, no, I'm not going to do that. Well, you're going to talk about Johnny Cash. No, I'm not going to do that. It's like, it's not going to be any, what about stories of the, all the people you've met, it's like, no, it's not about any of that. It's not about me at all. It's about things I've noticed that are interesting that might be useful to someone else. The purpose of the book is to be useful to someone else. It's not to be sensational. It's not to be charged or get you excited, other than about wanting to make something great. Like, that's the marching order of the book. Is I'm hoping that when you're reading it, you get a feeling of like, I want to stop reading because I want to go make something. That was the hope for the book. And also, if I tell one of the same stories that happens in the book, when I say stories, one of the principles that came up, which is rooted in a story of something that actually happened to me, that's not included in the book. The story leading to what's in the book are not in the book. But if I tell you a story about Jay-Z, and Jay-Z did this, and Jay-Z did that, and Jay-Z did this, when you're reading the story, you're not thinking, this is something I can do. You're thinking, wow, how cool is Jay-Z? He does that.
Right.
And you don't put yourself in it. And I wanted these to be open to where, when you're reading these things, you think about, what do I have to do with this? Yeah. Where am I in this? And it invites the reader to be part of this. So it's just ideas to engage with. And because it's not prescriptive, and because it's not, this is the right way and this is the wrong way, it invites you to think about these things and put more of yourself into it. It doesn't tell you how to do it. It invites you to decide how you want to do it.
To me, it's also a book. It's the difference between a book you might read once. So a book of a collection, your sort of memoirs of your time as a record producer would be a fascinating, sort of encapsulation of a multi-decade period in the music industry. But I feel like that would be a book that you would read one time. And I feel like what this book is, obviously with the image of the circle being maybe an embodiment of that, at least to me, is that I feel like it's a book that you go back to. Like, I read, whenever I start a new project, I read one of Stephen Pressfield's writing books again, just from cover to cover. And I feel like there's something in the way that you did it that, there's a difference between depth and width. And I think you've created something that has a greater depth and value to people. And it's the less commercial approach in the short term, but I think ultimately a much more important approach.
Cool. It's the book I wanted to write. That's one of the things about it, is like, And I think when we did talk about it all those years ago, that was probably what you said. It's like, well, that's not the commercial book. It's like, why do you want to do that book? It's like, why don't you do the one that everybody wants? It's like, because I don't want that. I want this. And it was a real puzzle to figure out how to do it because I didn't know anything in the book before I started. It would have been easy to tell them what I remembered, but to figure out why decisions were made that when they happened came instinctually. There were not principles that I had worked out. It really was a deep reverse engineering mission to try to understand this stuff. And I'll tell you honestly, I still don't understand it. Like if I open this book anywhere, I'll read from it, my mind will be blown. I'll say, yes, that's what it's like. But I couldn't tell you that, and I'll be surprised by it when I read it. Because the nature of this information it's ephemeral. You know, it's like smoke. It's all out of our control. And it's helpful to me to have it because I can look at it and it reminds me, it reminds me of how it works. But it's none of the stuff in it is easily accessible. It's hard for me to talk about the material in the book.
Yeah. I wonder why I said that to you, or if I said that to you, or if that's what you heard. Because what I remember is that I was working on Ego as the Enemy when we talked, and I was thinking about what that book would be. And I remember trying to explain it to you and not sure if you thought that was a good idea.
Really?
Yeah, that's what I remember. But
Wow,
that
that's
may just
cool.
be what creative people do. We never hear uh, we hear something very different than what other people are saying.
I believe that's probably true. I think that's true. Not even just creative people. I think
Yeah.
I think language isn't sufficient to share what's going on inside of ourselves with others.
And then you put memory on top of that, and it may as well be a totally different experience.
Yes, it's all made up. It's one of the reasons that I like pro wrestling so much. It's like I feel like pro
Yeah.
wrestling is more closer to reality than anything else that we get to experience. It's like it's part made up, where it's made up and where reality comes into it. We're never told. We're never told if, one of the characters doesn't like another character and wants to beat him up. Do they really not like him?
Yeah.
Sometimes they don't. Like sometimes real life they don't. Or a character is getting a divorce in this plot line. Are they really getting a divorce? Because sometimes they are. It's like we never know. It's like, where's the line? We know we don't know anything. And we know that, let's say there's a match and a guy breaks his arm in the match, which really happens because they're doing these crazy things. The next week he'll be on TV in a cast. I broke my arm. And there could be a version where in storyline, he broke his arm, but he didn't break his arm in real life. And it would look exactly the same when we're watching it. We never know. So it's this, it helps clue us in to the fact that it's all the Wizard of Oz. It's all made up. Everything we're told is just what's in our heads. And we don't even know if we're seeing, even if we agree, we don't know if we're seeing the same thing. It's all, the way perception works is just not, it's just ours. It's not, you can't share it.
Well, people are really critical of like Facebook and this plans to build the metaverse. And they're like, people would never want to do that. And it's like, people already live in the
We're
metaverse,
there.
man.
We're there.
None of this, people live in totally different realities. One of my favorite examples of this is like in the Odyssey. I talked about this with a bunch of people on the podcast before, but in the Odyssey, he talks about the wine dark sea. Who thinks the ocean looks like wine? That's like, so was he colorblind? Was the ocean a different color back then? Or was wine a different, like there's so many different things it could be. It could also just be a weird artistic choice like we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
But or a mistranslation. It could be any number of things, but it really makes you
Yes.
think about what color the ocean is.
Yes. I've seen a wine dark sea, by the way. I feel like I've seen that over the course of. I don't
I
see it every
haven't.
day.
So
Well, I have, and I wouldn't use that to describe how it is, but on a particular day, that might be the right description. And I'll tell you an experience I had when I went to school. I took a lot of art history classes, and I remember when we were learning about impressionism and seeing paintings of trees that had, it was like a brown tree with a green blotch and a yellow blotch, and it looked almost like a rudimentary, like a preschool painting where you just kind of put colors on, like if you did a cow and you put, like, you know, spots on the cow. So it looked like and I'm thinking, oh, that's what impressionism is. Impressionism is like, it's taking the idea and it's kind of reducing it into this more abstract version of itself. And then, I don't know, 25 years later, I went to the south of France where these paintings were painted, and I
yeah.
saw those trees, and they
Oh
look
wow.
exactly like that. And they have
Yeah.
these blotches, and that's what they look like. That is actually what they look like. But
Yeah.
growing up in New York, I never saw a tree like
Sure.
that. So I assumed
Sure.
this is a fantasy tree.
Right. Yeah. And to you, it was a fantasy tree because it did not exist.
Yes. Yes. It did not exist until it did.
Yes. Yes. And then, all art about an experience that is not yours is effectively that.
Yes. Yes.
And from that specific experience comes hopefully some kind of universal connection.
Yes. And again, when we say universal connection, the connection is universal, but what we're connecting over, we each make our own.
Yes.
We might connect to the same thing for two completely different reasons, and it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Yeah. And the only time we're aware of that disconnection is when you start to explain what something tastes like to you or looks like to you, and then you're like, "What? Wait, do we have different conceptions of what the color purple is?" And then everything, all your sense of reality is thrown into doubt.
Yes. And that's why wrestling explains explains reality better than anything else.
That's perfect. Rick, thank you so much. This was amazing.
My pleasure. Speak soon, my friend.
Let's do it.